It was reported, and everybody was surprised, but I wasn't surprised. We're taking in a lot of money coming into our treasury from tariffs, from various things, including the steel dumping, and our steel companies are doing really well, aluminum companies also. So we're very happy about that. I think that it's they'll be coming very shortly. They're going to have very detailed discussions on subjects that have never really been even discussed by people that sat in this chair, and they should have been very important subjects. And I think we're doing very well. Okay?
Mr. President, Mr. President. From Pakistan and again struck inside India, 40 security persons last week. How do you see this?
I've seen it. I've watched. I've gotten a lot of reports on it. We'll have a comment at the appropriate time. It would be wonderful if they got along. It seems like that was a horrible situation, but we're getting reports. We'll have a statement to put out. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Mr.
President, do you ask Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker to change the leadership of the investigation into your former personal attorney, Michael Cohen?
No, not at all. I don't know who gave you that. That's more fake news. There's a lot of fake news out there. No, I didn't.
What is the current status of your relationship with Mr. Whitaker?
Very good. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Whitaker. I think he's done a great job. He's a very, very straight shooter. I watched him during the hearing, some of it. I thought he was exceptional. He's a very fine man, and he should be given a lot of thanks by our nation. Okay, thank you very much.
What's your reaction to the lawsuits yesterday filed by the states against your executive?
Well, I think I called it exactly, right? Including the fact that they would put him into the Ninth Circuit. That's where they put him in. And I think we'll do very well. We have absolute right to do that. I have an absolute right to call national security. We need strong borders. We have to stop drugs and crime and criminals and human trafficking, and we have to stop all of those things that a strong wall will stop. I could call it a barrier, but I think I don't have to do that so much anymore. We'll call it whatever we want. But the point is that we have to have a stoppage. Billions and billions of dollars of illicit things are pouring through our border. And, you know, we talk about points of entry, and one of the things that we do have is a lot of money now for points of entry because everything was given. The money was given so much that you almost don't know what to do with it by Congress. But when it came to the wall, they wanted to hold back because it was politics. That's all it is. In fact, I hear the Democrats want to take down all walls along the southern border. And if they do that, you're going to have a very different country. But they're not going to do that. They wouldn't. First of all, they won't do it because they know it's wrong. They know walls are necessary, maybe more than we do. But they're playing a political game. And their new game is let's take down all walls. I saw where Beto wanted to take down walls. I said, they asked me, what do you think? I said, well, I think that's probably the end of his political career. We're doing very well in the wall. We're building a lot of wall right now. You know that. In the Valley, we're doing tremendous work in a very important area. We have a lot more under negotiation right now. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers. They're fantastic. And a lot of great things are happening. I think in the end, we're going to be very successful with the lawsuit. So it was filed. It was filed in the Ninth Circuit. And I actually think we might do very well even in the Ninth Circuit because it's an open and closed case. I was put here for security, whether it's Space Force, which we're doing today, or whether it's borders. Because if our nation doesn't have borders, we don't have too much of a nation, especially when drugs and all of the things that you know better than anybody, what's happening at the border. It's a bad situation. So I think we're going to do very well with the lawsuit. Okay? Thank you.
You said you referred earlier to your meetings in Vietnam. What
Yes.
do you want to achieve during that summit?
Well, I'd just like to see ultimately denuclearization of North Korea. I think we will see that ultimately. I have no pressing time schedule, and I think a lot of people would like to see it go very quickly from the other side. I really believe that North Korea can be a tremendous economic power when this is solved. Their location between Russia, China, and South Korea is unbelievable. I think that North Korea and Chairman Kim have some very positive things in mind, and we'll soon find out. But I'm in no rush. There's no testing. As long as there's no testing, I'm in no rush. If there's testing, that's another deal. But there has been no testing. If you look at the end of the Obama administration, it was a disaster, what was going on. You don't have that right now. It's a much different feeling. I think people have there's always danger, but I think people have a much different feeling. So I hope that very positive things are going to happen. I think that it'll be a very exciting couple of days. Thank you all very much.
Let's go. Press, make your way out. Press, we're finished.
Oh, Bernie Sanders is running, yeah, that's right. Personally, I think he missed his time, but I like Bernie because he is one person that, you know, on trade, he sort of would agree on trade. I'm being very tough on trade. He was tough on trade. The problem is he doesn't know what to do about it. We're doing something very spectacular on trade, but I wish Bernie well. It'll be interesting to see how he does. I think what happened to Bernie maybe was not so nice. I think he was taken advantage of. He ran great 4 years ago, and he was not treated with respect by Clinton. And that was too bad. I thought what happened to Bernie Sanders 4 years ago was quite sad as it pertains to our country. So we'll see how he does. You got a lot of people running, but only one person's going to win. I hope you know who that person is. Goodbye, everybody.
Press, let's go.
All right, you've been watching President Trump in the Oval Office. Always good for a little bit of, you know, he can get you laughing there, talking about politics. But he was not just talking about politics. He was talking about this new story from the New York Times about the U.S. Investigation into Michael Cohen, immigration, North Korea, and then, of course, then Bernie Sanders. Let's bring in Tim Carney. He's opinion editor at the Washington Examiner. He was here to talk about his book, Alienated America, which I loved, and we'll try to get to that. But in the meantime, let me just ask you about this. The New York Times is saying that they have reporting that the president called Matthew Whitaker and said, hey, can you help me get this guy up in the Southern District of New York to be the one investigating Michael Cohen rather than the other guy? And Whitaker apparently says, I can't do that, Mr. President, because he's already recused himself, and then nothing happened. So to me, this is like another one of these stories where the president raised a question, he was told it can't happen, and everybody moved on?
Our system works. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't come from politics, and so he often tries to do stuff that isn't quite the way things work, whether it's custom or legal. But we've seen so much in the Trump administration that the American system is set up so robustly that I think it often acts as a check on power, even when the president doesn't want to do it. So to me, this is a story that our system, that the Constitution and years of the United States government has set up, actually is working here to make sure that if Trump asks a question, the answer isn't always, yes, sir. It's, well, in this case, that would not be appropriate.
The New York Times, I should mention, says that that they had reached out to the White House and that the White House never responded, declined to comment. And then the president said that the story is fake news. So I guess, you know, we'll find out a little bit more about that. That's also a pattern that we've seen. The president also talking about the national emergency and the border. And so in your book, Alienated America, why some places thrive while others collapse, you got out of Twitter universe and you got out of cable news and you traveled around the country. What do you think people that are stuck in Twitterverse are missing about what people think about immigration?
So immigration, it's a national issue, right? It's going to come up to federal laws that are passed about it. But its impact is on a very local level. And so it's very interesting. In elite circles, immigration is an abstract question. But on the local level, it actually really has effects. And so I tell a story in Alienated America about my next-door neighbor, who he and I are good friends, but because he doesn't drink alcohol, he doesn't drink caffeine, he doesn't drink even herbal tea, there are these barriers to building community. And so Alienated America is about how community is falling apart in middle America. And you actually saw Trump did better, if you control for income, in places with more immigrants, because these were places where people were having more struggles building strong communities. So that's the key thing to understand here. Immigrants help America. But on the local level, immigration, if it happens really rapidly, can have this effect of making strong communities harder to build.
He also talked about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders announced he was going to run today. You write about in the book about how there were these districts, or congressional districts, where, let's say, a voter had voted for Obama, and then they voted for President Trump. They said that, you said that's not a surprise. But does Bernie Sanders have a way, if he were to be successful this time around, to actually reach those voters?
Absolutely, because what's going on is not mostly ideology. Trump's appeal wasn't mostly sort of, I mean, he wasn't a traditional conservative. His appeal was outside of ideology. Bernie Sanders' appeal was also, it was not mostly Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, that sort of thing. It was mostly, you have been disenfranchised. You feel like you don't have power in politics. That was Trump's exact appeal, was people who felt both parties were ignoring them. Bernie reaches out to those people too. His solution, is a big government solution involving campaign finance reform and that sort of thing. I think it's a horrible solution. But he's seeing the alienation. He's seeing the people who feel, I'm supposed to be able to have an influence on politics, and I don't. And again, that's exactly what Trump tapped into. So it's the same voter base.
And has Trump been able to hold the support of the people who voted for him in those districts? If you were an Obama supporter, then a Trump voter?
He certainly didn't turn them into Republicans. I do a lot of electoral analysis and show he didn't permanently make these people into Republicans. He is holding on to, as far as we can tell, among approval rating, a lot of these things. But again, a lot of the Trump support was not people signing up for a political agenda. So to me, from Washington, it seems opposite to say Trump cut taxes, even for corporations, and Bernie Sanders is going to raise their taxes. But that's not the opposite problem. So the same voter who voted for Trump was never going to vote for Hillary, but could consider voting for Bernie because he's a guy who's out there to take power away from the powerful and give it back to the regular people.
It's fascinating. It's good to have you here because this book is very good. So it's called Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. Tim Carney, really great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
And here are some other stories you should know about. It's our Daily 3. Number 1, Illinois State Police acknowledging they wrongly gave a gun license to the suspect in last week's deadly workplace shooting. Gary Martin had been convicted of aggravated assault and domestic violence, crimes that should have kept him from buying a gun. Number 2, another round of winter weather slamming the South and now moving on to the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic. Forecasters predicting more than 4 inches of heavy snow that may turn into a treacherous mix of slush and rain. You know, that's my worst kind, the icy mix. It could be coming this way. Number 3, a new study says the screen time for children under 2 years old has doubled since 1997. Television was the biggest factor, jumping from 30 minutes to more than 2.5 hours per day. Now to an alarming new claim. For nearly 2 decades, tourists visiting the Grand Canyon may have been exposed to radiation. According to the Grand Canyon's safety director, 3 paint buckets, believe this or not, 3 paint buckets filled to the brim with uranium ore were stored in the National Parks Museum collection building. Jonathan Hunt joins us with more. Jonathan, this is quite remarkable. These buckets were just sitting there?
Yeah, we just got off the phone with the whistleblower in this case, Dana, a safety, health and wellness manager called Elston Stevenson at the Grand Canyon National Park. He claims the exposure risk to tourists and national park employees was potentially up to 400 times the health limit for adults, 4,000 times what is considered safe for children. The radiation came from uranium rocks. Now, uranium was mined for many years around the Grand Canyon until safety concerns led to a ban in 2012. The rocks in question here were for some reason stored in buckets and left in the Grand Canyon's Museum Collections building, stored for years next to an exhibit where tour groups, including children, would often stop for 30 minutes or more. The whistleblower wrote an email to his colleagues to warn them, saying, quote, if you were in the Museum Collections building between the year 2000 and June 18, 2018, you were exposed to uranium by OSHA's definition, OSHA being, of course, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And Elston Stevenson just told us in a conversation with our producer, Jamie Brennan, that his bosses at the Park Service dragged their feet, ignored his complaints. He says, Dana, their behavior was essentially, quote, immoral.
And what are park officials saying to that?
Well, they say the rocks have been removed and an investigation is underway. And in an email to Fox News today, Emily Davis, spokeswoman for the National Park Service, also said a radiation survey was recently carried out at the building in question and it, quote, found radiation levels at background levels, the amount always present in the environment and below levels of concern for public health and safety. And she added, quote, there is no current risk to the public or park employees. Left unaddressed in that email, though, is what was the risk, not what is the current risk. Very different when you're using the present tense rather than the past tense, Dana.
Yeah, fascinating story, and we thank you, Jonathan Hunt, for bringing it to us. And we will have more for you all across the Fox News channel today. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. Here's Shep.
Breaking news, I'm Shepard Smith in New York, and our reporting begins with the bombshell article that broke in the last hour from the New York Times. It's a lengthy and comprehensive piece of reporting that includes this. Sources tell the Times that President Trump asked the Attorney General Matt Whitaker if he could replace the head of the Michael Cohen investigation with a Trump ally who had already recused himself from the probe. Our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, calls this evidence of corrupt intent and the very definition of obstruction of justice. Minutes ago, the president denied that he made the request. We'll hear from the president shortly. The Times reporting is by Mark Mazzetti, Maggie Haberman, Nicholas Fandos, and Michael Schmidt. And the context here is important. Let's revisit what had happened. Remember, Michael Cohen had been involved with the paying of hush money to two women who had claimed they had sex with the president. He was the president's longtime lawyer and fixer, and the feds raided his home and office. Remember, initially, the president expressed support for Michael Cohen. His lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, called Cohen honest. But when Cohen told the court that Donald Trump had ordered him to make the payments, and as we reported here, testified that in essence the president was something of an unindicted co-conspirator, the president and his supporters turned on Cohen. So with Jeff Sessions out as Attorney General, the president installed Matt Whitaker in that position. He'd been a U.S. attorney and then a CNN contributor who said, among other things, that the Mueller investigation had gone too far, that Trump finances were beyond Mueller's purview. In short, he'd sided publicly against Mueller and with the president. As acting Attorney General, Whitaker had previously said to associates that his job was to protect the president. The Times reports he told associates privately that his job was to jump on a grenade for the president. So with Michael Cohen cooperating and the investigation building, the Times reports the president called the new acting Attorney General, who seemed to be a Trump ally, and asked him if a new person could be put in charge of the Cohen probe. As the Time report goes, he asked whether Jeffrey Berman, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York and a Trump ally, could be put in charge of the widening investigation, according to several American officials with direct knowledge of the call. In essence, according to the Times, the president asked if someone he considers a loyalist could lead the investigation of which he was a part. The Times writes that there is no evidence Whitaker acted on the question, but it's the alleged phone call itself that raises the legal questions. Provided the Times reporting is accurate, did the president break the law in making the call to the Attorney General? We'll take that to Judge Napolitano shortly. First, John Roberts reporting with the president's reaction just a short time ago. John, to you.
And, Shep, good afternoon to you. Another in a long list of allegations that at some point along the line, President Trump has tried to use his influence to try to influence an investigation. A short time ago, signing his Directive Number 4 for the Space Force to create it under the auspices of the U.S. Air Force. President Trump was asked about this and denied that he asked Whitaker to put Berman in charge of the widening investigations there in the Southern District of New York. He also denied any idea that he had soured on Whitaker as the acting Attorney General as a result of that. Listen to what the president said here.
No, not at all. I don't know who gave you that. That's more fake news. There's a lot of fake news out there. No, I didn't.
What is the current status of your relationship with Mr. Whitaker?
Very good. I have a lot of respect for Mr. Whitaker. I think he's done a great job. He's a very, very straight shooter. I watched him during the hearing, some of it. I thought he was exceptional. He's a very fine man, and he should be given a lot of thanks by our nation.
So the president there saying he's got no problem with Matt Whitaker, who will no longer be the Attorney General very shortly, but then also going back to say he never asked Whitaker to put Jeffrey Berman, who's the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, in charge of the investigation after Berman had recused himself. Now, the president said there, I don't know who gave that to you. That's fake news. The president sounded almost surprised being asked about that question, but according to Maggie Haberman, who is one of the names you mentioned, Shep, that was on the byline of the piece, she tweeted a short time ago, as often happens, White House was fully briefed on the story's reportage and did not choose to say anything ahead of the publication. then the president comments afterwards. So the president was fully aware of everything that the New York Times was going to report. In a statement, the Department of Justice also shooting down the allegation that the president asked Whitaker to do him a solid. The DOJ saying, quote, under oath to the House Judiciary Committee, then Acting Attorney General Whitaker stated that at no time has the White House asked for, nor have I provided any promises or commitments concerning the special counsel's investigation or any other investigation. Mr. Whitaker stands by his testimony. No question, though, Shep, this will just add to the litany of items that the Democrats are going to be investigating for the next 18 to 20 months. Shep?
John Roberts will be back to you shortly. Remember the wording there, no promises or commitments. That's not what the Times is reporting. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano is here. They're not saying, the Times is not reporting that Matt Whitaker provided promises or anything else. Here's what they're saying, that a phone call was made, and here's the full screen. In this phone call, the president asked whether Jeffrey Berman, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York and a Trump ally, could be put in charge of the widening investigation, the Cohen investigation, according to several American officials with direct knowledge of the call, asking him, hey, could we put my ally over here in charge of this Cohen thing? Because the Cohen thing had just gone very badly when Cohen testified under oath that the president directed him to make those calls, and in essence, according to the reading of that, making him something of an unindicted co-conspirator.
And Matt Whitaker testified under oath just a week or 10 days ago. The president referred to that testimony in answer to the question from one of the reporters, that he had not been asked to influence any decisions that the DOJ was being asked to make.
Well, is that the same thing, though? Because what he said was, because you put this other guy in charge, could he be put in charge? The semantics often matter.
They do, because there's two potential crimes here for Matt Whitaker. One is actual perjury, lying to the Congress. The other is misleading. Remember, you could be truthful, but still misleading, and there are those two statutes there. You not only have to be truthful, you cannot mislead. So if he said, the president never asked me to do something, and it's misleading because he knew what the president wanted. Look, Jeff Berman is a respected lawyer because he's respected.
That's the one that, according to the Times reporting, the president wanted put in charge of the Cohen investigation.
Because the president nominated him and caused him to be the chief federal prosecutor in Manhattan. But Mr. Berman had the good ethical sense to say, this involves Donald Trump, I'm not involved in it.
This phone call, if the Times reporting is accurate, is that phone call evidence, the phone call would be evidence of what?
Corrupt intent. That is, an effort to use the levers of power of the government for a corrupt purpose, to deflect an investigation into himself or his allies. Remember, the federal prosecutors in New York have two investigations going on. One was the investigation of Michael Cohen, and that is passed on to a guy named Robert Kazumi. Bob Kazumi, a professional prosecutor, an apolitical person, used to be the chief prosecutor at the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's the one who told a federal judge, this Michael Cohen, David Pecker, paying women to remain silent was orchestrated by Donald Trump. Second investigation, one still going on here in New York, is the investigation of the Trump inaugural and transition. Who paid for all that, and was there anything that went wrong in the payments? This must be some there because they are investigating it. President Trump, if the New York Times is correct, wanted his ally to be in charge of both of those investigations. And Matt Whitaker, to his credit, apparently, did not execute that command.
But that phone call, you said that's evident of corrupt intent.
On the part of the president, because he's making a...
Would that be obstruction?
Yes. Well, it would be attempted obstruction. It would only be obstruction if it succeeded. But if you try to interfere with a criminal prosecution that may knock at your own door, by putting your ally in there, that is clearly an attempt to obstruct justice.
The article is lengthy. It's online on the homepage at NewYorkTimes.com. Judge, there's more to it. There's discussion of others who were close to the president.
There's a very, very disturbing discussion in this article, which again the president denies, about his utilization of colleagues in Congress and utilizing...
Well, he wasn't actually asked about this part, but go on.
Utilizing... You're right. At least in the part we saw, utilizing their subpoena power, because the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives at the time, to subpoena documents that Bob Mueller wanted to keep secret in order to interfere with Mueller or embarrass Mueller or cause people to question Mueller's motivation. Quite frankly, I've never seen anything like this before. A sitting president of the United States using his allies in the Congress to interfere with an ongoing criminal investigation. This breaks new ground.
That's the allegation in the Times report today. The four reporters with the bylines there, people will know them, and their reporting has stood up quite well. You wonder, we're at the very beginning of this. This has only been out in the open for the last hour and a half. The president's White House had been involved, but if you watched him there, just as John Roberts just reported, it appeared from the president's reaction that he knew nothing of this. But certainly his White House did, because Maggie Haberman says the Times told him.
It appeared that he was surprised by the question. Now, maybe he was unaware.
Maybe he didn't know the article was out.
Right,
We don't know.
The article was out, but the article is, quite frankly, dynamite, lengthy, and well documented. Where it goes from here, I don't know, but I'll tell you who I know is reading it as we speak. Bob Mueller and team.
Judge, thank you.
You're welcome.
Much more on this as it comes. There's more breaking. It's one of those days. President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, listen now, wanted to share nuclear power technology with Saudi Arabia, despite warnings from national security officials. That's according to a new report from the Democratic-led House Oversight Committee, citing whistleblowers within President Trump's own administration. Remember, Michael Flynn also served as President Trump's in his campaign and pleaded guilty in the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. So far, no response from the White House. Back to the chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, once again. So now Michael Flynn, Saudi's nuclear.
Yeah, and this is something that Elijah Cummings had been investigating for a number of months when he was the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. But now that he has taken over the chairmanship of that committee, with the Democrats taking control of Congress, he is launching a full-blown investigation into what was going on. According to a report that I read, according to whistleblowers, this is a staff report from the committee, multiple whistleblowers have come forward to express concern that the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was helping to spearhead this plan to sell sensitive U.S. nuclear power technology to Saudi Arabia. Flynn was an advisor to a subsidiary of a company called IP3, which was developing a proposal to build nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia. The whistleblowers also say that Flynn failed to disclose on his security clearance renewal application a trip that he took to Saudi Arabia in June of 2015 on behalf of IP3, which we should point out has several retired generals on its board of directors, including Fox News contributor General Jack Keane. According to the staff report, one senior political official stated that the proposal was not a business plan, but rather a scheme for these generals to make some money. That official stated, "Oh, okay, you know, we cannot do this." The whistleblowers say that the main promoters of the plan were, here at the White House, General Michael Flynn, who was the National Security Advisor, his former deputy, K.T. McFarland, and Thomas Barak, who was the inaugural committee chairman, who the judge was just talking about a moment ago. The report says that the whistleblowers expressed significant concerns about the proposal, saying, quote, they have warned of conflicts of interest among top White House advisors that could implicate federal criminal statutes. They have also warned about a working environment inside the White House marked by chaos, dysfunction, and backbiting. The report also says that the NSC Ethics Council and the NSC's Office of Legal Advisors were concerned that Flynn himself may have violated criminal law by acting as an advisor to IP3 at the same time that he was the acting national security advisor, or at least the one during the transition, and then in his role as the national security advisor. So again, this is something that will be thoroughly investigated by the Democrats. Elijah Cummings, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, promising that he is
to the United States. And that's why he opened a counterintelligence investigation into the president back in 2017. McCabe also says he informed the Gang of Eight, as they call them, top congressional leaders, both Republican and Democrat, and nobody objected. The Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the then House Speaker Paul Ryan and their Democratic counterparts gave no resistance. McCabe spoke to NBC News while out promoting his new book. He said it was not his decision to open the investigation, but a recommendation from his team, who thought the president himself might be a national security risk. President Trump is pushing back against McCabe, tweeting, among other things, so many lies. The chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge reporting live from Washington.
On his book tour, Shep, Andrew McCabe told NBC that he did brief congressional leadership on the case he opened against the president in May 2017, right after FBI Director James Comey was fired.
And I told Congress what we had done.
Did anyone object?
No one objected. Not on legal grounds, not on constitutional grounds, and not based on the facts.
But a member of the so-called Gang of Eight called McCabe's claim confusing and possibly misleading because the source said senior lawmakers knew months earlier that the FBI had opened a case on the Trump campaign and, by extension, the candidate himself. On ABC, Andrew McCabe downplayed his conversations, described just 2 days ago as serious, with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein about invoking the 25th Amendment after President Trump fired Comey.
I made the decision not to include these comments in the book because they were exactly that. It never went beyond the realm of a brief, offhanded comment by the Deputy Attorney General to me.
Late yesterday, a Department of Justice official told reporters that Rosenstein expects to leave the department mid-March with a nomination for his replacement as early as this week, Shep.
Catherine, Roger Stone, the former Trump advisor, now facing charges in the Russia investigation, and he's been ordered back to court.
That's right. Earlier today, the federal judge here in Washington posted a new order that means Roger Stone will be in court Thursday. The judge is considering whether to revoke bail or modify the terms of a partial gag order on the case. The backstory here is that Stone posted a photo on Instagram of the judge Amy Berman Jackson showing what
2 men on the night of his reported attack. The tipster claimed the men were the brothers police later arrested and then released. Police told Fox News' Matt Flynn that they reviewed surveillance video from the apartment building again, but that they still can't find video of the 3 together. Jussie Smollett is black and gay and is the star of the Fox television show, or A Star. He said last month that 2 masked men physically attacked him and yelled racial and homophobic slurs. The actor also claimed that they said this was MAGA country. Smollett's lawyers say he feels victimized by people who think he had a role in the attack. Matt Finn reporting. He's live from Chicago at the spot where Smollett says the attack happened. Matt?
Shep, at this hour, Chicago police and Jussie Smollett's crisis manager have not confirmed to us that Jussie talked to police at any point today. Chicago police tell me they want to give Jussie a, quote, responsible amount of time to respond to their very important request for a follow-up interview in this case. And Chicago police say what happens next in the coming days largely depends on Jussie's actions. It's possible that Jussie Smollett may stop cooperating with police, and police could seek an arrest warrant by taking this case to prosecutors or a grand jury. But police also acknowledge that they could, if Smollett stops cooperating, that this case really could stall. And filing a false police report here in Illinois is a Class 4 felony. It carries a sentence of up to 3 years, but it is also probational. And Shep, we just want to set the scene for you. This is the intersection where Chicago police say Jussie Smollett filed the report of the alleged attack. This door right here, this lower level door, would be the door that Jussie used to get in and out of his residential building. And then across the street here is where the Osendario brothers were spotted on that sidewalk. Our viewers may recall we've aired that surveillance still picture many times of the 2 brothers walking down this sidewalk along the brick wall. And if you look up, there's a camera directly above that sidewalk. We think that that is probably the camera that spotted the 2 brothers, but Chicago police cannot confirm that. And from this location here, Jussie Smollett would have walked just a couple blocks around the block to the subway and back. Shep.
Initially, the police in Chicago said that his report was credible. Then they were calling him a potential victim. Well, how are they categorizing Jussie Smollett now?
You know, Shep, right now they're no longer insisting that Jussie Smollett is a victim. They've started to call him the person who reported this incident. Shep.
All right, Matt Finn, live on scene. Thank you. Millions of tourists visit the Grand Canyon every year, and now there is word some of them may have been exposed to radiation 400 times stronger than what's safe for adults, and thousands of times the limit for kids. Not in the park itself, but at a museum on site at the Grand Canyon. A whistleblower who worked at the park says the radiation came from uranium rocks kept in buckets. Trace Gallagher reporting live from our West Coast News Hub. What is this?
And Shep, these 3 paint buckets filled with uranium ore had been sitting in the same place for nearly 2 decades. The whistleblower, Elston Stevenson, who's also the Grand Canyon Safety Health and Wellness Manager, says his big concern is the buckets were right next to an exhibit that kids, who are clearly more vulnerable, would sit next to for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. In fact, the whistleblower says the only reason they found the uranium is that in March of last year, the son of a park employee, who's also a Geiger counter enthusiast, got a radiation hit when he went near the buckets. But Elston Stevenson says his bosses would not act, so he sent this email to his colleagues, quoting, "If you were in the museum's collection building between the year 2000 and June 18, 2018, you were exposed to uranium by OSHA's definition." Of course, OSHA being the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The uranium was finally dumped into an old mine on site at the Grand Canyon, but Stevenson claims the buckets were actually brought back into the building. Shep.
Trace, what's the response from the Park Service?
Well, the Park Service confirmed to us a short time ago that an investigation is underway, and a spokesperson said a radiation survey was conducted at the museum's collection building, saying it, quote, found radiation levels at background levels, the amount always present in the environment, and below levels of concern for public health and safety. The spokesperson went on to say there is no current risk to the public or park employees, and the building itself has reopened. A spokesperson for OSHA also confirmed that an investigation is underway, but would not offer details. Still, the whistleblower in this whole thing thinks the Park Service has a secrecy pact to conceal the radiation exposure data. And we should say, so far, there has been no information released about whether park employees.
Warnings across the country, from Philadelphia back over through Chicago, stretching all the way back to New Mexico, Arizona, all areas where winter storm's going to be impacting this, as we're talking about a very large system. Now, all this moisture is currently lifting off the Gulf of Mexico. Still rain, but as you get into the northern reaches, you begin to see this into the plain states, turning into snow. It's all going to be about where the temperatures are cold enough to support ice, and then eventually to support some snow. The only spot where it's warm enough to be rain, well, that continues to be where this is currently moving. It is going to be running into some much colder air, and as it moves its way across the eastern half of the country, it is going to be snow, it's going to be ice, it's going to be sleet. It's really going to turn out to be a real mess for a lot of folks. Here's your future radar. Overnight tonight across the plains, running into the northern Midwest, the Great Lakes states, all the way into early tomorrow morning. By early tomorrow morning, we see the leading edge of this system and some of that cold air, Shep, beginning to move into the D.C. area. The D.C. area could see as much as 3 to 5 inches of snow running into the mid-Atlantic and stretching around that region before eventually turning into ice. Now, maybe some snow for New York City, but it will likely quickly turn into rain on the backside of this system. I do think by the time we get into Thursday, we're mostly clearing off. But, Shep, yeah, a lot of people, 200 million. It begins in the next several hours and will be lasting all the way into early Thursday.
And yet by Thursday, mid-50s in New York City.
Warming back up, exactly.
I'll wait for that. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. A Fox Urgent now, and a live look in Philly. The former Vice President Joe Biden taking part in a discussion at the University of Pennsylvania. A source with direct knowledge tells Fox News Biden is, quote, almost certain, unquote, to run for president in 2020. No word on whether this will be the moment he makes the announcement. We're monitoring it. It comes on the same day Senator Bernie Sanders threw his hat in the ring again. The independent from Vermont gave Hillary Clinton a run for her money in the 2016 Democratic primaries.
You're going to run for president?
I am going to run for president. That's correct.
What's going to be different this time?
We're going to win. We are going to also launch what I think is unprecedented in modern American history, and that is a grassroots movement, John, to lay the groundwork for transforming the economic and political life of this country. That's what's different.
Senator Sanders joining an already crowded field for a chance to run against President Trump. As it stands, 11 Democrats, he'll have to become a Democrat because they're not going to allow an independent in there again, change the rules. 11 of them either officially running or launching exploratory committees. Peter Ducey reporting he's in New Hampshire, where several candidates have been making stops. Hey, Peter.
Shep, many of the Democratic presidential hopefuls are focusing on policy proposals, and Senator Sanders is doing that too, but he's also picking a fight with the president.
Bottom line for me is I think it is absolutely imperative that Donald Trump be defeated, because I think it is unacceptable and un-American, to be frank with you, that we have a president who is a pathological liar, and it gives me no pleasure to say that, but it's true. We have a president who is a racist, who is a sexist, who is a xenophobe, who is doing what no president in our lifetimes has come close to doing, and that is trying to divide us up.
And with that, the sharp-tongued Senator Sanders is trying to confront President Trump a lot more directly than some of the other 2020 hopefuls like Cory Booker.
If we as Democrats especially make it about him and not about us, make it about one office and not the cause of our country, we're making a very big mistake.
But President Trump apparently does not have the same strong feelings about Sanders. A few minutes ago, he welcomed him to the race from the White House and said he likes Bernie. Shep?
But the campaign has responded to the Sanders announcement separately, right?
Right, and they've essentially tried to elevate him to the top of the field of potential Trump challengers. A spokeswoman said this a little while ago. Bernie Sanders has already won the debate in the Democrat primary because every candidate is embracing his brand of socialism, but the American people will reject an agenda of sky-high tax rates, government-run health care, and coddling dictators like those in Venezuela. Only President Trump will keep America free, prosperous, and safe. And Sanders agrees, at least with part of that. He thinks that the ideas that only he was pushing for last time, like Medicare for all, are now part of the mainstream. So he is describing his self-described democratic socialist perspective as mainstream for the Democrats now. Jeff?
All right. Peter Ducey, live in New Hampshire. Thank you. The man accused of killing the mother of his child back in court today in Colorado and facing new charges. We'll get a live update from Denver. Plus, a man trapped in quicksand for more than 10 hours, and he survived to tell us all about it. We'll talk to him and his girlfriend who helped save his life next. But first, he is the only person who could make black and white colorful. That from the supermodel Claudia Schiffer, one of the many people paying tribute to Karl Lagerfeld today. The iconic fashion designer died in Paris, his death announced by Chanel. Lagerfeld had been the creative director of the French fashion house since 1983. He was also the creative director for the Italian luxury brand Fendi and had his own brand. The German-born designer was known for as much for his sharp comments as he was for his trademark white ponytails. A hearing to decide whether the case should go to trial. Kelsey Barrett disappeared on Thanksgiving Day. Surveillance video shows her shopping at a grocery store with the couple's one-year-old daughter. Search crews still haven't found her body. Her parents say they think Frazee killed their daughter because of a custody battle over that child. He has not entered a plea. Alicia Acuna reporting. She's live today in our Rocky Mountain newsroom. Alicia.
Hi, Shep. Kelsey Barrett's blood was found in multiple locations inside her townhome. That, according to a Colorado Bureau of Investigations agent on the stand today. CBI agent Greg Slater said the blood, which tested positive as the 29-year-old mother's, was found on the bathtub, the floor, the bathroom wall, door, and on an electrical plate near the sink. Earlier, Woodland Park police officers said a cadaver dog hit on a spot near a car outside Barrett's home. All of this coming out in the preliminary hearing for Patrick Frazee, who was brought into the courthouse in Cripple Creek, Colorado today with a bulletproof vest. Testimony so far includes cell phone records showing on the last day Barrett was seen alive, Frazee made a call to his mother, his phone pinging near Barrett's home. In the days to follow, his, Kelsey's, and another woman's cell phones all started to ping and move through Colorado. Police have said Kelsey's phone ended up in Idaho. That other woman, Crystal Kenny from Idaho, pleaded guilty earlier this month to tampering with evidence. She said Frazee asked her to poison Kelsey's coffee. Kenny says she agreed but didn't do it. Shep, the descriptions and new charges today point to a very violent crime. Shep.
Alicia Acuna, live from Denver. A man who survived being stuck in quicksand for hours on end says it was like standing in a huge puddle of concrete that dries instantly. Over the weekend, Ryan Osman and his girlfriend, Jessica McNeil, went for a hike in Zion National Park in southwestern Utah. A few hours into the trek, Jessica says she tripped and fell into quicksand. And as her boyfriend was pulling her out, the mixture of sand and freezing cold water swallowed him up. Let's turn to them. Ryan Osman and Jessica McNeil. Good to have you both still with us. How are you?
Good.
What did that feel like, Ryan?
It was
one of the scariest moments of my life. Yeah.
10 hours.
When I tried to, I was in the water for 11 hours straight, up to my hip on my right leg, and my left leg I was able to stand on the sand. It wasn't sinking like the right leg had. I'd been there, for a few hours, and then I had gotten so exhausted I started to fall asleep.
Wow. And Jessica, you came up with some sort of pulley system?
No, that was the Rangers. I was trying to dig them out with my hands, and it was freezing, and I couldn't do it. So I had to hike back by myself and call 911, and they came and rescued him.
Wow. And so you were there all alone during that time?
Yeah, I was.
Here's some video of the rescue. I can't even imagine. Had you ever felt quicksand or thought about the concept of it? I mean, Jessica, you were in it first, it sounds like. Try to describe the feeling if you could.
I was just walking through the water, and we were on sand, and it was fine. And then I took a step, and my leg just went right into the ground. It's like it sucked it in. And then I panicked. I thought I was going to be stuck, and my next foot got stuck as well, and then he pulled me out, and next thing you know, his leg was completely immersed.
What was going through your mind at that point, Ryan? I mean, did you think when she left that you were going to be able to survive this? I mean, were you still sinking, or could that one leg hold you up?
No, I stopped sinking right at my hip, but I knew it took us 5 hours to get to where we were at. We were about 5 miles in, and so I knew she had at least a good 5 hours of a hike back before she could get cell service at all.
Media outlets at a refugee camp in northern Syria this week, and she says she wants to come home. Her name is Hoda Muthana, and she is the only American out of 1,500 foreign women and children who are living in the camp near the Turkish border. She traveled to Syria in 2015 and first lived in the capital of the former caliphate, Raqqa, where she married an Australian ISIS fighter, a decision she now regrets.
When I came here and I saw everything with my own eyes, I realized that I made a big mistake, and I know I ruined my future and my son's future, and I'm deeply, deeply regretting.
While Muthana says that she was brainwashed by the Islamic State online back in 2015, during that year she was extremely active on Twitter using anti-American rhetoric and calling on others to kill Americans. Shep?
Trey Yanks reporting live from Jerusalem. One of baseball's biggest free agents is finally off the market 113 days later. According to multiple outlets, the all-star infielder Manny Machado, the kid from Hialeah, has agreed to a 10-year deal with the Pods in San Diego, and it's worth $300 million. If and when the deal's completed, and it sounds like it will be, it'll be the second richest contract in the history of the game.
I have an absolute right to call national security. We need strong borders. We have to stop drugs and crime and criminals and human trafficking, and we have to stop all of those things that a strong wall will stop.
President Trump said he expected it. Now 16 states are doing it, suing to block president's emergency declaration for the border wall. And today, we're all over it. Welcome, everyone. I'm Charles Mann in for Neil Cavuto. And this is your world. And that lawsuit claims, quote, the executive actions directing the diversion of federal funds and other resources for border wall construction are unlawful and unconstitutional. To John Roberts on how the White House is responding. John.
Charles, good afternoon to you. The watchdog group Public Citizen actually filed the first lawsuit against the emergency declaration yesterday in district court in D.C. And now, following on the heels of that, California leading 16 states in challenging this. This case is filed in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals jurisdiction in California. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rarely friendly to the president, though he did get a good ruling just the other week. Here's the California Attorney General Javier Becerra on why they filed the suit. Listen here.
In every respect, the facts prove that Donald Trump is acting outside the law in declaring an emergency, but he's also acting outside the law in trying to raid pots of money that have already been allocated by Congress.
Now, the president himself weighed in on this just a short time ago in the Oval Office, signing the directive that will create the Space Force as part of the U.S. Air Force. The president predicting that he is going to fare well in the courts, may even not have to wait until this gets to the Supreme Court before he can declare victory. Listen here.
I think in the end, we're going to be very successful with the lawsuit. So it was filed in the Ninth Circuit. And I actually think we might do very well even in the Ninth Circuit because it's an open and closed case.
The president predicting that all of this would happen last Friday. There you see him in the Rose Garden when he announced his emergency declaration. Today, taking aim at California's failed high-speed rail system as a way of getting a dig in on California, leading the charge here with this action against his emergency declaration, saying, quote, the failed fast train project in California, where the cost overruns are becoming world record-setting, is hundreds of times more expensive than the desperately needed wall. In the meantime, as his emergency declaration begins to make its way through the courts, the president has got plenty of other money that he can tap into immediately, Charles, to build wall. He's got the $1.37 billion that Congress gave him. He's got $601 million from the Treasury that he can tap into. He's got some money from the DOD. All of that together, if you use the formula that what Congress gave him would build 55 miles of wall, the president should be almost immediately able to construct nearly 100 miles of wall. And if he moves some more money around inside the DOD before he even touches any of the money that he gets unlocked by this emergency declaration, he should be able to build almost 200 miles of wall. So that's getting pretty close to what he wanted at the outset of this. Charles?
You know, John, he said he would. And, of course, the legal battle will ensue. We'll watch it. Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you. And my next guest says the president's emergency declaration is on solid legal ground. California Republican Congressman Tom McClintock is a member of the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you and I spoke recently, and it's interesting because it was no surprise that this lawsuit was coming. It's no surprise that all of these states are so-called Democratic states or run by Democratic governors. But when we listen to A.G. Becerra, your state's Attorney General, justify filing a lawsuit on behalf of Congress, it feels kind of weird. Why wouldn't Congress, take these steps on their own? Why would Becerra and other local officials need to step up for Congress?
Well, I don't know. Congress has standing in its own right, but I'm glad he did because he's been completely incompetent at getting cases ultimately settled in his favor against the Trump administration. I think this is largely political, and I think that ultimately this suit's going to fail as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's a large political aspect to this. In fact, I thought it was very telling late last week ahead of the announcement from President Trump when Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats, the Speaker of the House, changed her tune and started suggesting not legal action, but urging or suggesting to your party, Republicans, hey, if you want to go down this path, fine, but you've opened a Pandora's box, and when we have a Democratic president, we will take unilateral action. There will be national emergencies that cover a range of issues from climate change to carbon tax to any issue like that. So what do you make of the idea that she is going a different route here and suggesting the Republicans have made a mistake here?
Since when has the left ever relied on legal precedents to expand their power? Barack Obama wrote DACA out of thin air. I mean, that is legislation over which he had no authority. In this case, the president has a specific legal grant of authority that was adopted by Congress and signed into law back in 1976. It's been invoked 58, now 59 times for national emergencies such as civil unrest in Sierra Leone and Burma. The problem that Becerra and these leftist activists are going to have is convincing the Supreme Court that somehow the civil war in Sierra Leone is a perfectly legitimate national emergency, but 60,000 foreign nationals illegally crossing our border every month is not.
I think the tactic is, from a legal perspective, is that this circumvents the power, the Congress's rightful power of the purse. I'm not sure how many of the current or former national emergencies intervened with respect to usurping the power of the purse from Congress to the executive branch. What would you say against that argument?
This law specifically gives the president the ability to reprogram military construction funds that have not already been obligated. In other words, those contracts have not yet been signed in the event of a national emergency that he has declared. Again, there's a long precedent for that law. Was it a good idea for Congress to give the president that authority? That's a separate question. But the fact of the matter is, it did. He has that authority. He has the responsibility to defend our country, and he's now using that authority to meet that responsibility. That's a very good thing.
Congressman, I want to shift gears a little bit because there's a lot of really growing calls out there for McCabe and Rosenstein to testify in front of Congress. What do you think?
Well, I think that they should, but far more importantly, I think that they should be subjected to the same kind of inquiry that we've seen the Mueller investigation take over the last couple of years. There needs to be a special counsel to get to the bottom of all of the skullduggery that was going on in the FBI and the Department of Justice to undermine the constitutional election of a president of the United States. And that's exactly what they were doing with phony evidence, destruction of evidence, of a complete double standard in the application of the law. I mean, you can go down a long laundry list of misdeeds by this cabal of partisan Democratic operatives at the upper levels of the FBI and the Department of Justice. We have got to get to the bottom of that. We have a new Attorney General who's most quitting her job until her 78-year-old Aunt B moved in and stayed for 16 years. Now she says because everyone isn't lucky enough to have an Aunt B and because a year of child care can rival the cost of a year of college, she is unveiling her, quote, universal child care and early learning plan that she says guarantees child care and preschool for everyone. Warren says for millions of families it'll be free and for everyone else it'll be affordable. And she says the way it works is the federal government would partner with states, cities, and local school districts to create a network of child care options. And because child care and preschool workers would also be doing educational work, they would be paid the same as public school teachers, saying, and I'm quoting here, the federal government will pick up a huge chunk of the cost, though she didn't define huge chunk, but she did expound on how she plans to pay for it. And if you guessed raising taxes, you would be right. Watch.
We can pay for universal child care and a whole lot more if we just ask the 0.1% to pay a fair share.
She means those worth more than $50 million. It says her ultra-millionaire tax would generate $2.75 trillion, but that her child care and preschool plan would only cost 1/4 of that. If you do the math, like you said, $70 billion a year, that's $700 billion over 10 years. Charles.
Trace, thank you very much. Well, lots of big numbers out there, of course, but no one's talking about the biggest one, $22 trillion, our growing federal debt. So how can we afford all of these big plans that are being promised to us? Let's ask the Democratic strategist, Marjorie Clifton, the Federalist's Emily Jasinski, and Trump 2020 Advisory Board member Madison Jessiano. Madison, let me start with you. You know, the plans are just mounting, whether it's universal child care, universal basic income. The numbers add up and the digits go on almost to infinity. How can we pay for it?
Hi, Charles. Good to be with you. You know, it's very, very frustrating to continue to hear them coming out with these socialistic plans. And as far as I'm concerned, they seem to be quite economically illiterate. You look at Medicare for all. You look at this universal child care that she's proposing. It all sounds great. It's all in good intention. But when you sit down and you crunch the numbers, it's never going to work. Medicare for all is a great example. We've estimated many bipartisan ways that it's about $32 trillion that it would cost. Even raising taxes dramatically, they wouldn't even be able to raise half of that. And so similarly here, they want to do a wealth tax to pay for this. And of course, they're not even doing a dynamic analysis of how that wealth tax would affect the economy. And so ultimately, their numbers of what they say they could raise with the wealth tax, I think, are very inaccurate. And so it's not going to work. And people across this country, when it comes down to looking at the details of this plan, aren't going to support it. They may support the overarching idea, but they won't support the numbers.
But for now, I'm going to put you down as a no, okay?
Put me down as a no.
Okay, Marjorie, Democrats are making a lot of promises, and the zeros are adding up.
Yeah, so it's going to require some smart math. And look, this is painful because it's not an easy message for a lot of people to hear, especially when people are throwing around socialist terms. But the fact of the matter is the cost of childcare does have a systemic ripple effect. So for every dollar invested in early childhood interventions or education yields about a $4 to $9 return to federal programs. So things like incarceration and early pregnancy and lack of employment and things that have a longer term challenge. But the challenge that we have with our government is that we don't look long term. We look right in the year at hand, and that's a really hard thing. So it's going to require us thinking about these things differently, just like with health care. How do we create equal market forces versus just paying out for Medicaid for all or any of these kinds of programs? So how we get around the messaging, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge.
Emily, your thoughts?
Well, I actually agree strongly that investing in children is important and it can be beneficial to the economy. What I don't agree with is, like, listen, this plan was not proposed in a vacuum. So this $70 billion, not just on its own. If you take most of the Democratic candidates, you take someone like Elizabeth Warren, and you take them down the list of things that of major government takeovers that they agree with, whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's free public college tuition, whatever it is, if you just take them through that checklist, your numbers are going to be giant. And the other thing to think about here that's hugely important is what this means. It means the government would be potentially licensing daycare centers, whatever it is, childcare options, which you're asking the government to then stick its hand into another huge sector of the economy, a sensitive issue for a lot of parents, controversial in a lot of cases. And so you're asking the government now to intervene in a very important part of children's lives. So it's not just about the money either. There's a huge principle to consider here as well.
And that kind of big government controls is part and parcel of what people call socialism. Now, I will say, Amy Klobuchar says she's not down with the free college.
He believed discussions to remove the president by invoking the 25th Amendment were serious based on his conversations with Andrew McCabe. But this morning on ABC, McCabe downplayed those discussions.
The fact is, and it's not in my book for exactly this reason, I made the decision not to include these comments in the book because they were exactly that. It never went beyond the realm of a brief, offhanded comment by the Deputy Attorney General to me.
McCabe justifies the counterintelligence probe into the president, citing the firing of FBI Director James Comey, and claims President Trump wanted the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to include Russia in the memo to back up the president's decision. But as these events unfolded 2 years ago during congressional testimony, McCabe struck a different tone.
I don't believe there is a crisis of confidence in the leadership of the FBI. I suppose that's somewhat self-serving, and I apologize for that. It was completely within the president's authority to take the steps that he did. We all understand that.
In a separate development, a short time ago, the Democratic chairman of the House Oversight Committee released this statement summarizing the interim findings of House investigators. Quote, the whistleblowers who came forward have expressed significant concerns about the potential procedural and legal violations connected with rushing through a plan to transfer nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. They have warned of conflicts of interest among top White House advisors that could implicate federal criminal statutes. The Democrat-led committee investigators are focused on a number of former administration officials and campaign aides, including the former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and his deputy, K.T. McFarland, who at one time, as you know, was a Fox News contributor. Charles.
Captain Harris, thank you very much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. Andrew McCabe also slamming that Inspector General report that led to his firing.
That report was not like anything I have ever read before. An investigative report includes all of the evidence. It includes all of the information, not just those facts that support the conclusion that you'd like to draw. So I have big problems with that report. I disagree with the conclusions they drew, and that is something that I'll be raising in a civil lawsuit that I'll be bringing against the Department of Justice.
So does he have a case? Well, let's get the read on all of this from former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy. McCabe now is going to bring his own lawsuit. Of course, there's a chance that he could face some criminal prosecution of his own, particularly as the new AG gets settled and the DOJ decides where they want to go with this, right?
Yeah, well, look, if he thinks he's been wronged, he should bring a lawsuit. On the other hand, we can't ignore that the best defense is a good offense, right? The Inspector General referred him to the Justice Department for consideration of whether he should be prosecuted for making false statements to the FBI agents who conducted that investigation. So if he wants to get ahead of that by, pushing his point of view, I can't say as I blame him as a legal strategy, but he's going to have to justify what he said to those agents.
Every interview now it gets a little murkier, and there's a new headline. One of the headlines today, of course, is the Gang of Eight and the role that they may have played or what they knew with respect to an investigation into President Trump.
Yeah, to me, Charles, I got to tell you, that's the biggest non-story I've heard in a long time. The Gang of Eight is there to provide oversight by the legislature on the executive branches, in this instance, the intelligence agencies. The FBI is our domestic intelligence agency as well as a law enforcement agency. And they're there because some matters are classified and sensitive, and there should still be congressional oversight. The issue, it seems to me, is not whether the Gang of Eight was advised of the investigation at a time when everybody knew there was an investigation and things had kind of erupted in May. The question is, why wasn't the Gang of Eight advised before then? The Gang of Eight gets quarterly, I think it's quarterly, reports from the FBI about the sensitive investigations they're doing. The FBI decided to leave the Trump-Russia investigation out of it up until evidently McCabe disclosed it to them. That's, to me, a more interesting question. Why weren't they told, during the campaign?
Now, some questions about Mr. Whitaker. New York Times had a very long article, and part of the article said that Mr. Whitaker, who privately told associates that part of his role at the Justice Department was to, quote, jump on a grenade for the president. And it also talked about, how President Trump, had sort of loyalty test. Where is this taking us?
Well, look, I think it's a big critique of the president's handling of the Justice Department. The president is not a lawyer, and he has a different kind of an idea, I think, of what he expects out of the Attorney General and out of the top brass at the Justice Department. They're used to acting and proceeding without any political interference in the day-to-day running of the Justice Department. But here we have a situation where the president is being investigated, and he believes the investigation is unfair. And I think he has lashed out at times. I think he's been unwise to do it because, in the end, it's going to hurt him more than it hurts anyone.
But is there anything illegal about that, or any perception in your mind that his relationship with the acting Attorney General Whitaker was somehow anything violated the law?
No.
Other than it was not the usual relationship we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it's not the president runs the executive branch. The president gets to run the Justice Department. There doesn't have to be a Justice Department. There has to be a president. That's the way our executive branch is in the system.
We are going to also launch what I think is unprecedented in modern American history, and that is a grassroots movement, John, to lay the groundwork for transforming the economic and political life of this country. That's what's different.
But will it be different at all? Senator Bernie Sanders jumping into the 2020 race after many saw him as a spoiler for the Democrats in 2016. Does the party risk the same thing happening again? To the Daily Caller's Vince Colonnese, things have certainly changed. He was a maverick. He really came out of nowhere. He captured a lot of people's hearts and minds, but his plan has sort of been adopted by so many other people. You got to wonder where Bernie Sanders fits in this time around.
Well, that's right. People like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, they've all signed on to his Medicare for All plan, for instance, in the United States Senate. And what that means is the field is kind of muddy now. The socialism that he was preaching just 4 years ago has sort of been adopted by his entire political party, even though he's not actually quite a Democrat. And the Democrats actually rigged the last election against him. He seems to have forgiven that. He's jumped in as a Democrat, running once again. And as I said, the field is very muddy. Everyone seems to be basically supporting the same socialist positions that he has. And I don't think he's necessarily a standout figure in that field.
Yeah, and to your point, 2020 candidate Kamala Harris distancing herself from Bernie Sanders when she spoke with Fox's Peter Doocy yesterday in New Hampshire. I want to roll tape. Take a listen to this.
One of the most popular Democrats in America right now is the guy who won here in 2016, Bernie Sanders, describes himself as a democratic socialist. To compete in New Hampshire, do you have to, in the Democratic primary, do you have to move more toward the democratic socialist part of the party?
Well, the people of New Hampshire will tell me what's required to compete in New Hampshire, but I will tell you I am not a Democratic socialist.
So, Vince, she's adopted almost a lot of the same economic policies, but she's not embracing the term. What does that say for Bernie Sanders?
Well, she's scared of the term that Bernie Sanders isn't, which is socialist. He's still on board with that. He says he's a democratic socialist. But, I do think something interesting happened with Bernie Sanders' rollout this morning that suggests that he's not exactly the same person that he used to be. In his interview with Vermont Public Radio, the first thing he said he was doing, and by way of running for president, was going after the president, who he accused of being a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe. These are words that are used by the identity politics left, not traditionally Bernie Sanders. You had Bernie Sanders this morning attacking the president for his positions on illegal immigrants, but it was just a couple years ago that Bernie Sanders himself was saying that open borders was a right-wing conspiracy. This is a Bernie Sanders who's changed, and he's moving further in the direction of the identity politics left, watering down his own message and running from the socialism message that he's run on so much in his career.
We got less than a minute, though, Vince. I do have to ask you, because it's sort of like the elephant in the room amongst the Democrats. This identity politics you talk about, a lot of people are saying Bernie Sanders is the wrong person. He's an old white guy who represents sort of the power struggle that the social justice warriors in his party are trying to fight against.
That's right, and they're upset with him, and what a weird hand to be dealt, that you can't run for political office unless your skin color's the right color or if your gender's the right gender. That sounds like a form of prejudice that we've worked for a long time to get rid of in the United States, and instead to judge people on their merits. There are plenty of people who judge Bernie Sanders on his merits who say socialism should not be a part of the United States. We just heard the president say that message this week in Miami, just yesterday. But to judge him based on his age, his skin color, his gender, we're supposed to put that behind us, yet his party seems to be embracing it.
Yeah, content of character. Joining me now, mother of journalist James Foley, killed by ISIS in 2014, Diane Foley. Diane, your thoughts as this woman is making this passionate plea and admitting that she made a mistake?
Well, certainly as a Christian, we all make mistakes and need to consider forgiveness, particularly for her young child needs to be protected and raised. However, Hoda and the many thousands of other ISIS fighters who have promoted terrorism need to be held accountable and brought to justice. I feel that is vital. And to be honest, I really call on our President Trump to bring the alleged Beatles, Cody and Al-Sheikh, who horrifically murdered 4 Americans in 2014 and 2015. I feel we, too, need to do our part to counter terrorism by holding these folks accountable.
So in other words, if she were to return to the United States, you would like to see her face some form of criminal justice here for the acts she may have committed as part of ISIS, and of course for urging the kind of violence that she did on a public forum like Twitter.
Absolutely, sir. I mean, she needs to be held accountable for those mistakes and monitored very carefully.
Of course, in 2014, we already knew what kind of vicious, evil organization ISIS was, a blight on humanity. And, of course, with your son's death being amongst those, that the carnage that they've left around this world, the idea that she joined in the first place bothers a lot of people. This is where I think a lot of Americans, and even Christians, are having a hard time saying, on this one, it's hard to forgive.
Well, I think, you know, there's forgiveness, but then there's accountability. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we can certainly understand how a young person can make that kind of a mistake, but we also need to hold her accountable and keep monitoring her and her associates because she spent 4 years of her life being brainwashed in this horrific ideology of hatred. And she's tried to incite more and more violence on her own countrymen. So she needs to be held accountable for that, sir.
What about justice for your son, James?
Well, to be honest, you know, we still are asking President Trump to please bring Cody and El Sheikh, extradite them here to the United States and have them be held accountable in a federal criminal court. So far, there's been no real accountability for their horrific murders. Charles.
There's a conversation now between President Trump and leaders in Europe about allowing ISIS fighters to return to those countries, in part to finally end the so-called caliphate. Obviously, you've already alluded to the idea that we would have to monitor this one particular person. So imagine having to do that with 4,000 people, particularly in the UK, France, and Germany. But
it is a very heavy burden.
Yes. But in order to completely crush the ideological part of this, because we've retrieved almost all of the land, we have destroyed them on the battlefield, we have curbed terrorist activities, but in order to completely crush the idea of a caliphate, of a supremacy that allows them to kill and maim anyone who doesn't share their beliefs, should we, at the final part of that, bring back these fighters?
I feel that we must find a way to hold these thousands of jihadist fighters accountable for their human rights crimes. I can understand European countries struggling with the burden of that, and that's why perhaps an international court for terrorists is the answer. I feel that we would be it would be very sad at this point to let all these people go. We still